You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, I take you back in time to July of 2022 and a behind-the-curtain Patreon-exclusive episode of In Defense of Ska. The way they've documented the ska genre over the last 4 or 5 years is absolutely amazing, and the work that they recently put on hiatus over there is fabulous front to back. Aaron Carnes' 2 editions of In Defense of Ska are must-reads in my view. I also really enjoy his friendship and co-hosting with Adam Davis from Omnigon and Link 80. That was an awesome pairing for me because I'm a Link 80 fan from the early days of that band. In 2022, Aaron asked if I would do a bonus episode called the Punk Podcast Summit that we did with other ultra-niche podcasters who talk about one band in great detail. I suggested we invite my main influence behind Unscripted Moments, David Anthony from As You Were, a podcast about Alkaline Trio, to be on. We also rounded it out with another one of my past guests, Cheska Colombo from the Menzingers-themed On the Impossible pod. In Defense of Ska recently wrapped up their show after hundreds of fantastic episodes, and I asked Aaron if we could rescue this bonus episode from behind the paywall curtain. Aaron, Adam, David, and Cheska all agreed. So just as a reminder, David is the guest on our When All Your Fears Collide episode and has hosted about 150 As You Were podcasts about Alkaline Trio episodes, and Cheska is the guest on our Victory Lap episode. Aaron Carnes appeared a few times on Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda, but if you go find our Ska Sucks Deluxe episode from May 14th, 2024, you will hear all of Aaron's participations in our show. Thanks to all involved, and without further delay, here is the Podcast Summit with Aaron Carnes, Adam Davis, David Anthony, Cheska Colombo, and me. Enjoy.
I want to do so. The reason I was kind of envisioning this episode was I wanted to talk to people that, like yourselves, who do podcast punk. I guess we can call them punk podcasts, but they're specifically focused on, one band and just deep dives into these one bands. I find it fascinating. Like what we do here is we do a deep dive into ska. So I think there's similarities to it, but I also think there's differences to it because I think ska kind of gets viewed as extremely niche, but in actuality, and I think we kind of expose this on a regular basis, it's actually not very niche, or at least its tentacles are, vast reaching.
Right.
And, like all these people you wouldn't expect were fans or used to be in ska bands. And it's found its way into all these different areas of culture. But what you guys do is you take a single topic and you go as deep as you possibly can into this one topic. So I find it very fascinating, and I want to kind of learn more about that. So first, we should introduce our 3 guests one at a time. You can say who you are and what your podcast or podcasts are. Why don't we start with Greg?
Hi, this is Greg. I am half of the team at Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda, and we talk about all things propaganda, which has been an insanely enriching experience for me for the last couple of years. So I'm really glad to be here.
Nice. David?
I'm David Anthony. We finished the podcast. It was called As You Were, a podcast about Alkaline Trio. And I do another podcast with my buddy Dan every few weeks or once a month or whenever we're mad enough to do it. But yeah, Alkaline Trio was the podcast we did.
Nice. And Cheska?
Hi, I'm Cheska. I do the On the Impossible pod, Menzingers podcast. We started out by going through all 13 songs on the Impossible Past. And are hoping to do some more. I hate remote recording, so I've been looking to get back into the studio with some people and talk about the Menzingers a little bit more. But I really like getting in there and getting into the nitty gritty of the lyrics and the locality. And I don't I try to talk to normal people, since I think that's what a lot of Menzingers fans are, just kind of blue collar homies who, like cheap beer. And yeah, that's about it.
Cheska, how come you like doing it in person and not remotely?
Anxiety. I I don't know. I'm always convinced that if I don't do it in person and see everything in front of me, that that the conversation's going to be lost and I'll never be able to replicate. I don't know. It's merely an anxiety thing. I did the last episode we did was with Neil Hilborn, who I'm a huge fan of, who I found out was a fan of my podcast, and I was like, how is this a thing? But when he offered to come on, I did the remote recording thing and it worked out perfectly fine. But the whole time, all I could think about was, I know I'm only recording my side of this. I know it. But it was fine. But it all worked out.
Yeah, we've never done an in-person episode of this podcast,
Right.
And so what's funny is Adam and I were a guest on Steve Choi's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's aired yet, but he was he's like, I want to do this in person, and he lives in Santa Rosa, so that's an hour and a half for Adam and I, and so we're like, all right, let's do it. And it was totally different experience.
Very different.
What did you think, Adam, compared to like the way we normally do podcasts?
Oh, I hate driving at this point, and I hate doing anything outside of this format. Like, it's so nice to just be able to like be doing something and then 2 minutes later pop down to my studio and just hit record. Like,
yeah, I get that.
The idea of doing things in person actually gives me anxiety. And makes me and I think that manifests in me being grumpy and kind of mean. And
I get that.
But it turned out fine. Like Troy had like such a nice vibe. His house is so chill that it was great, and all the mics were already set up and ready to go when we got there.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, the whole reason I started doing the Menzingers podcast is because I set up a podcast studio in my recording studio, and I was like, I want to get some practice in so that, like, I'm all the way, like, I went to school for recording and audio, and like I know what I'm doing, but I wanted to get used to like my setup. So I was like, 13 songs, I could do 13 episodes, that's fucking fine. And then I just kind of got really used to the vibe of just like having someone over and like recording a conversation for an hour and then talking about basically the same thing for like a lot more time. It was really fun.
Yeah, I can see wanting, I mean, if you have everything all set up and ready to go,
right,
and you already have that knowledge,
yeah,
that would definitely be the more comfortable way to do it.
Right.
I'm curious about David too. David, didn't you and Tim record a ton of the episodes for Alkaline Trio in person and then switch remote?
Yeah, we did. I mean, we lived in the same city, so we did a bunch. And then kind of when COVID started, we started doing it remote. And then like Tim moved outside of the city, so we kind of finished it remote. And, I think for me, I see the benefits to both, but I think our episodes were a lot more short form. We were doing a song an episode. They were about 30 minutes a piece, some longer. And I think I found it actually better remote because what we would do, since, just getting over to the other person's house, getting set up, chatting for a bit, talking, doing an episode, 30-minute episode would take like 2 hours out of the day.
Right.
Whereas, so we started like kind of batching them where it's like, all right, we're going to do these 2 or 3 songs, do 2 or 3 episodes. But by the end of a third episode, we would be a little burned out. And I think it would get a little worse. Whereas for the format of talking about one song, I actually think that like kind of benefited us because we could do it week to week, just really focus in on one thing and be like, all right, we're doing it at 7. We got on at 7,
right,
and, maybe had, 10, 15 minutes to like catching up crosstalk, but then just kind of did it. And I think it made our episodes sharper. I do think interviews, one, I'm of two minds. I love doing interviews in person when I can, but I think, just the fact that more people have become comfortable with recording themselves at home on Zoom, on whatever, actually just really opens up your access to have other people on. And I think that is also kind of a nice part of it is, I think for me, the best interviews are always when you are able to kind of lean into whatever the subject's, comfortability is, how comfortable they are either in person or digital. Like, I think really for me, I try to always do what the guest is going to be most comfortable with, because I think that's going to give you the best interview.
Yeah.
But for Tim and I, we just kind of did our thing and were able to do it back and forth. And there's some mishaps here and there, quite famously, but it worked for us for the most part.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was, I've been a journalist since 2010, and like, I've always loved when I got to do not only in-person interviews, but in-person like kind of experiences where there's stuff happening and you get to talk to people and you get to be part of an experience. That's always been like the most fun for me. So I do have a special spot in my heart for like in person, but the idea of trying to organize interviews in person, like it's not even I can't even remount. We would not have like 80% of these interviews if we had to be in person.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's
Like-
why I have 14 episodes and y'all have like 5 million between all of you.
Yeah,
the way
that's-
that
yeah.
Greg, the way that the Propaganda podcast pumps out shit, I'm like, holy shit, okay. good for
Well, yeah, I
y'all.
mean, every episode of theirs is a dissertation that like
Dead
makes me
ass.
humbled by the fact that like that can exist, which we could get more into. But like, yeah, I think to your point, Cheska, like I think when you're doing, a shorter form thing, almost like treating it like, kind of like a series of a show, I think you can
Right.
do stuff like that where it's like, all right, we have 13 slots, so let's like kind of control it and make sure like everything feels the same, sounds the same, and like I think there's something to be said for that because obviously remote recording can have its challenges.
Yeah, I keep saying that if I don't end up making more episodes, at least I'll be like the Op Ivy of punk podcasts, where I just have one thing. I put it out, maybe people listen to it for a while, and maybe there'll be rumors about my return. I don't know.
Respect.
I like that.
Now, Greg, me, Cheska, and David have all been guests on your podcast.
Yeah.
When I was a guest on your podcast, you were very much like you really wanted to have the video on Zoom up, like that's your style. And our style obviously is the opposite. We deliberately don't have video. This is a real nitty gritty podcaster question,
Yeah.
but I'm just curious of what people think. Adam and I, when we started doing this, like, I don't know, we fiddled around a little bit and we're just like, it's really awesome to not have to think about, it's really awesome to be remote and not have to think about what people are looking at you and thinking, or having to be aware of how you look on camera. And for me too, I'm just like looking down at my notes. I'm like fiddling with shit.
Yeah.
And I get to feel like I'm just lost in my voice, and I'm your voices are all kind of in ether, and we're all having this conversation, and my self-awareness kind of disappears in a weird way.
Yeah.
Tell me why you like to see people when you're on digitally remote.
So I definitely have changed my perspective on that over time. I used to really be into that, but now I kind of realized what you all were saying about how there's a varying level of comfort for different people. And I realized that by requesting people to come on video, maybe I was creating a less than ideal experience for them if they preferred to not have it on. So, for example, like right now, I'm not on camera and I'm like kicked back and I'm looking out the window over my like backyard and stuff like that at the moment. And if I had the video on, I would be a lot more engaged with what was going on the screen. So right now I'm actually I'm very at peace with this approach. And I kind of realized when I had a couple really good no video experiences that I decided I was going to leave it up to the guests. So what I do now when I invite people is when I send the link to the video or to the interview link, I say to them, come on video if you choose to do so. And if you do, I will then turn on my video as well. So what I do is I put the ball in their court. And if the video comes on, then I turn mine on. And if the video doesn't come on, then I just keep it totally blank like that. So I've actually started to leave it in the guests' court to choose. And I found that to be a really nice little change of pace for me.
My biggest pet peeve when I listen to somebody's podcast is when, especially musicians, when they'll be like, "Oh, I see you're in your studio. What's that behind you?" And then they go,
Right.
oh, that thing? Yeah, that's I got that. And it's like, there's so many times where when people are on video, they'll point out a thing that, and then not explain what it is properly.
Right. or put a picture of it on Instagram or something like that. Like you can do that if you're like, oh, go to the Instagram or whatever if you have to see a picture of what we're talking about. But that's like so much extra work as well.
Yeah.
So back to my setup. Do you guys all feel like you're doing something incredibly niche, or does it feel like it seems niche, but it's not really because we're talking about deeper issues? What is your perspective on your topics?
I'll start. I mean, it definitely was niche, and I think kind of by design. And part of that is not really knowing. With Alkaline Trio in particular, there's a very like dedicated, passionate fan base there. So we knew that existed. But it is kind of a big ask to be like, all right, we're going to do a song by song podcast for their entire discography, and like every weird like comp track or these things kind of lost the time. We're going to touch it all. So we knew we were doing something intentionally niche, and kind of for people who wanted to go deep, which I think is a unique thing. But I think it was just kind of truly at the start, it's like, hey, like we kind of want to do this thing together and let's just see what happens. And thankfully, like we had people who were like really dedicated listeners and supported us on Patreon, did all those things that podcast hosts asked for, which is great. I'm really, really thankful for that.
I assume you guys are both huge Alkaline Trio fans. Was that a big part of it too?
Yeah, I mean, so this was kind of like a small point of contention in the quote unquote punk podcaster community, but there's that podcast Blink 155, and that like had just started. Like they probably had only done like 5 episodes when Tim and I were starting doing that, and they were kind of doing a different energy than us, where it's like theirs was a little more of like a hangout pod, and kind of talking around the stuff and like building this own mythology, which is great. But like Tim and I were like, we're big into criticism and like just really like nerdy, going deep into a subject. And we felt like this was like, all right, this is something we know a lot about. And kind of the premise was I was the person who like fell in love with this band young, followed them the entire time, maybe had some struggles with certain areas of their material, but Tim just fell off. And didn't know a lot of it. So there was going to be songs that he was hearing for the very first time. And part of that was kind of the thing where we put the songs into like 4 different buckets. So like early era, mid, whatever. And then every week they were in different playlists, and we would hit random, and whatever song came up was the song we would talk about next. So occasionally, you would get a song where it's like, I knew it, and I'd be like, oh boy, you're in for something next week, bud. And get to have that experience of like him being kind of the lapsed fan and me being the person who like remained dedicated, though there were times that was easier than others. But I think, for me, we knew we were going to be talking to an audience that like had to have one of those same feelings, right? It was either you related more to me, where you stuck with this band and maybe felt some twinges of disappointment with certain albums, but we're always trying to find the redeeming parts, or you were the person who's like, yeah, I knew like the first 3 and then I stopped listening. And I think the idea was to kind of like merge those 2 journeys together and kind of be a vessel for whatever type of fan you were for this band. And I think that was kind of the fun, like novel element we put on top of it.
If you read some of the reviews on like Google, Apple, or whatever, there's definitely some people that seem upset that you don't just praise every single song that some songs you approach and say, I'm not really into this song, or this is not their best work.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is early on, Tim was trying to like play the heel a bit more. He's a big wrestling guy. So early on he was dialing it up and people were not happy about it. But I mean, that's the thing, is you're going to run into that. And I think the thing that I'd be interested to hear everyone else's perspective, but when you're going through this, like no band is batting 1,000, like no band is perfect. But obviously, and this is a thing I've been thinking, I think a lot, especially when I look at Twitter and see people just like losing their minds debating a new record. It's like opinions vary, like keep that at the core of what you're doing and saying. So like we always tried to be respectful of like, listen, like, I want to be conscious of the fact that, like, maybe to someone this song like really fucking changed their life and meant a lot to them and was important to them. And I don't ever want to diminish that, because to me, there's no worse type of criticism than one that attacks the audience. I think it's cheap. I think it's mean spirited. I think it's self righteous. You go at the art. And it's not like, oh, what kind of fucking idiot would like this song? And it's be like, no, this thing doesn't really work for me. I think it misses its intention. I think it doesn't land its points. And to me, I think that is how you can say something like that and have the audience probably be able to disagree with you but not be mad at you. But when you make it kind of a personal attack,
Did we
I
lose
think
David?
that's kind of gross. And I think
he'll come back on.
There's a long history of that type of
but we
stuff
can-
occurring.
we can change. We
in
can
music
jump over to
journalism and
Cheska with the same
podcasting
question.
Oh damn!
You know, people want to dial it up. But
I
it's,
can't say that I
that's
really
not the vibe I
thought
like,
about it while I
so to
was
speak.
doing it, like of it being niche. I guess because I've always been like very much in the local like Menzingers communities of just people who see each other at all the same shows and stuff, and like those are the people that I started to interview and talk to. It felt very much like, yes, this is niche, but even if only the people I'm talking to listen to this, it's kind of fine. Like, I don't know. I went into it very much seeing it as a recording project, and then it kind of became a lot more than that, which was wonderful. So, you know, I think about it a lot in the way that you kind of describe how ska seems like a niche thing, and then it actually appeals to so many people. Like, I'm from New Jersey, so like everybody has some sort of relation to ska somewhere in New Jersey, and I feel like also in this area, you know, even if you're not a diehard Menzingers fan, you've probably, you know, you're probably a Gaslight fan, or you're probably like, you know, a Brian Fallon guy. Like everything kind of just like ties together, and I feel like very like locally, East Coast wise, like the Menzingers are very maybe niche here in a way that they might not be like in the middle of nowhere. So I don't know. I haven't really thought about it too much, and it hasn't really like affected the way that I look at the subject matter, because also like the Menzingers are not something that, you know, is up for scrutiny as much as like an entire music genre is. You know, it's typically like, oh yeah, we all have this positive opinion. Of course, like I'm writing about this album that some people, or I'm in, you know, talking about this album that people consider, you know, one of the best in the last, you know, 10 plus years of punk. Yeah, I don't know. If it feels niche, it feels like comfy, if that makes any sense. Just like, oh yeah, this is kind of, you know, if we're all in this bubble, it's kind of dope.
But Greg, for you, your approach is so different. I'm curious because, like, not only are you diving deep into these propaganda songs, but you're bringing on guests from all over, you know, from all these different worlds.
Yeah.
Like, if you bring on like Sami Zayn, or John Darnielle, I mean, I got to imagine there's people that are not particularly very familiar with propaganda that are fans of Sami Zayn or whatever that are just going to listen, or do you think it's like, maybe this, you know, maybe you kind of have to be a little bit of on board with propaganda to even really want to do that journey, even if it's a guest you're interested in?
Yeah, interestingly to me, the episodes that you just mentioned, Sami Zayn and John Darnielle, I thought would be like, you know, tons of downloads, but those episodes get exactly the same amount of listens as all of our other episodes. You could have an obscure history professor on as the guest, or, you know, a local person who is just talking about a song that they like, and that gets the exact same amount of listens. Our audience size doesn't really change depending on who is on the show, because for some reason I found that, you know, retweets by somebody with, you know, 100,000 or 1 million Twitter followers doesn't change the amount of actual engagement with the show. So, yeah, so I've not found any sort of listener boost by having a high profile name versus somebody who just has something really interesting to say versus somebody who studies the topics that we're doing in sort of an academic career where they like write books about it and do research about it. So that was an interesting revelation to me, was to see that it really doesn't matter who the guest is. It's more about the show in general is kind of what I've found. But for us, the niche aspect has it's really pushed us. It has pushed both Keith and myself. But I have to say that since David's here, the reason that I started the show is because of the Alkaline Trio As You Were podcast. I was like going on walks and runs in my neighborhood, and I found that Song by Song podcast, and I was like, hey, I wonder if anybody's done this about Propagandy. And they hadn't. So I harassed my friend Keith online until he decided that he would co-host it with me. So that's how I found Keith and we got started on it. But we recorded a bunch of episodes kind of like as testers to decide like if we were good enough at it, and if like, because we were like, yeah, we'll record like 5 episodes, and if it stinks, we just won't ever put it out. And we felt pretty good about it. And so that's kind of how it came to be. But throughout doing the show, I mean, we've learned about the Oka crisis, the standoff at Kanesatake in Quebec in 1990. We've learned about police picking up First Nations men in Canada and driving them out to the middle of nowhere when it's minus 40 outside and dropping them outside of the car so they freeze to death. We learned about the genocide in East Timor. We have learned about so many topics that it has become so wide-ranging that even though it's niche because it's about songs, the topics and the Easter eggs that are found within every song have made it so it just very, very much is not niche for either one of us at this point. So it's like just an ongoing education. And I just treat every song as a chance to learn about something new for a couple of weeks and then talk about it on the recording with my friend. So that's kind of the way we approach it.
So, David, how do you feel to find out that the Propagandy podcast was directly inspired by you?
Well, I mean, Greg has been kind enough to tell me this before, but I've said it. It's incredibly flattering because, I mean, I'm a big Propagandy fan. There's no shock there. I was on the show. But I think what they do, there's so much more, and Cheska, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts as well. But I think there's so much depth to that band where it's not like, there's a difference between like, we're doing a Propagandy song, so we have to like read several books about the East Timor genocide. Whereas I'm like, Matt Skiba likes motorcycles, so 30 minutes on that
Fire
today.
Truck, go vroom.
Yeah, like there is a little bit of like, not to say that any art is like better or worse than the other based on those merits, but like there is something about and Greg, I think it's interesting you say like, the episode, listenership doesn't change because when we would have guests on, we noticed the similar thing. And when I've done another podcast that was more guest dependent, we noticed that didn't really move the needle because I think it was just people interested in what we were doing,
Right.
and they were along for the ride. And I think there's something cool to that. But yeah, to answer your question, like I really do think that like the Propagandy podcast is like, to me, such an incredible version of this because you're also putting out episodes that are like sometimes like 3.5 hours long, which is mind blowing to me.
5 hours and 9 minutes is our record.
Yeah, I was going to say 3 hours.
Fucking insane.
You're underselling it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I watched Ben-Hur. I got confused.
I also just want to point out that because we are on a ska podcast, I have done some research into Bob and the Saggets, aka the ska band that the members of the Menzingers were in before the band, and I'd love to tell you about it at some point during this. It's an adventure.
Tom did tell me he would do the podcast once, and then didn't respond to my follow-up, but I didn't really push him on it. So
Same.
Eventually. Let's talk a little bit about your approach to research. And I feel like everyone's going to have a little different point of view given the nature of their uniqueness of their podcast. I do pretty extensive research because I want to do interviews where I know as much about the guest and their experience and their everything that I can possibly know in advance, because I think like that's a better interview where rather than the host is learning everything as they go, that they kind of know everything, and then that lets the guest go even deeper, and then that's where you learn on the even deeper stuff, and you can kind of guide it more.
Absolutely. I feel like when I'm listening to an interview and I feel like the person interviewing someone that obviously I love enough to be listening to talk for over an hour, and they're just kind of scratching the surface, I want to like scream, just like, "Hi, do your work. ask a question that I want to be asking."
Yeah. Or sometimes I've talked to people, or they've reached out to me to be a guest, and it's like they're like, I wanted to do this thing where I would learn about. It's like, okay, I get that you think it's fun to be discovering a topic
Right.
as you do in a podcast, but I don't think that creates a very good listen for people.
Yeah. The worst when people interview you, Aaron, is when they go, "So what's ska?"
Oh my god.
That's just like, oh, stop.
So why are you defending ska? Like,
What is it?
So what? Once you tell us a little bit, Cheska, about your approach to research.
Yeah, so I feel like I have a kind of grassroots approach to research because the Menzingers are such like they were very like DIY, house show beginnings. So like so many people who listen to them or who are in like the similar bands and like the northeastern Pennsylvania area, like there's so much lore that goes into that period of time when those bands like the Menzingers, Tiger's Jaw, Captain We're Sinking, and all of them were coming up, that a lot of the research that I do comes from just reading what people say on the internet, and honestly a lot of it is hearsay, and I fully lean into that. I found out a lot from just reading Reddit posts. Like a lot of times I'll just search for the song on Reddit and see what people were talking about, or like see, if there's like a niche little subreddit somewhere where someone posted a live video and was telling a story about the Menzingers, or or like, hey, this guy came and I don't know, fucked up my bathroom, or just like little things like that. I really like to find, and for certain songs I find that it works really well, like Ava House is a song that's specifically about like a house venue, and that was one where I was really able to dig into like the fun facts side of things, whereas there's songs like Sun Hotel, Mexican Guitars, Gates, and stuff like that, where I really like leaning into the lyrical analysis side of things. Genius, I can't shout out Genius enough. I think it's a wonderful crowdsourced thing that we have in this world, is just people, sharing what they know about lyrics and what they know about a song. And what I don't like to take Genius at face value all the time. I like to kind of like take what I learned there and research it a little bit further than that, kind of like when you read the bibliography of something and then just kind of like, offshoot from there. I just really like to kind of start with the people and build it out so that like, when I did my episode with Neil Hilborn about Sunday Morning, and we were, a lot of the things that are mentioned are very regional to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and a lot of that was something that he had no idea about, not having been from the area. But since I'm someone who has been, that's perspective I was able to give. And there's been great people who have reached out to me and given some great perspective as well, that's helped the way that I was able to do my research moving forward. Like there was one guy, Brandon Finnegan, who his artwork, I try to make custom artwork for every episode, and a lot of my artwork ended up just being his photography that he took just kind of going around Scranton and taking pictures of the landmarks that are talked about in Menzinger's song. So I don't know, I really like to get it from the people. I like to discuss lyrics and what they could mean. And also with an album like On the Impossible Past, where so many things are tied together and there's so many callbacks, and especially there's even, there's callbacks to other albums, and then, future albums will call back to On the Impossible Past. And there's just so much lore around the Menzingers that I try to just bring it all into one place and make it kind of a thing that I can, fanboy out with people about, like, hey, shit, we know this. One like amazing memory that I have is after I did my Burn After Writing episode, I was at a show with like a bunch of people who, some of them were people who had met through the shows, some had met through the podcast, and like one of my friends literally starts like shaking my shoulders when Burn After Writing started, because he's like, I know so much about this song now. This is great. And I was like, that's really nice. Cause like I've been to a million Menzinger shows where, I know the words, I'm singing them, I'm having a great time, but it means a lot that like the research that you could do on a basic level and just kind of share as like a party trick on a podcast could be something that like can affect the way that people look at a song or like hear a song live. And I don't know, I think it's worth doing like the groundwork and getting in there and finding out just like the stuff on the ground.
Yeah. So I'm curious, David, on your approach of research or just episode preparation, I guess you could say, for yours, or what you used to do, I guess you should say.
Yeah, I mean, kind of similar to you, Aaron, like kind of coming from like a journalism background. I had like a lot of training and like knowing how to research and do all that. So like that's the thing I was really into. And I think kind of building off what you said, like, yeah, I think it's important to know as much as you can about the subject, whether that's like a person you're interviewing or the thing you're talking about. But I think, with art, there are also intangibles. And I think sometimes, and there's a really good example I think Greg would have about Propaganda, and I believe the band was Saxon. But like you can sometimes make connections that are there, and it's like, oh, this is obvious, but it's not at all what the authorial intent was. So I always tried to approach it as like, here's what I think this could be. Or like, I think this could be read a few different ways, because I think ultimately it's important to not come off like, I'm a know-it-all, especially because people build their own meanings and own connections to things. But I think it's about like, I think this could be like one of three things. Here's what I think, and kind of take you on that journey a little bit of like, here's what I think this line could be referencing, or this could be a callback to this, or this, little thing like. But I think similar to what Cheska was talking about, the regionality was really at play, where it's like, oh, when, Matt Skiba sings about Channel 11, like Channel 11 was our local PBS affiliate, and on Saturday nights they showed this. And like when he references that what he's talking about, and there's some things you can't also like, I think it's important to, go beyond the surface level, but also, and this is the big thing I learned from journalism, is like not assume that the audience knows everything you do, where it's like, for me, it's a given, like, oh yeah, when he sings about the fireside, everyone knows what that is, but that's not true. And so giving that history and context, like I think so much of journalism, I think so much of writing, and I think so much of what everyone here is doing is providing context to a subject, because context is ultimately what denotes the truth.
That's a great point. I love that.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's just like we're trying to add more depth to people's listening experience and make it fun for them. And yeah, sometimes, you may talk about something that like isn't your favorite, but like I think it's like trying to understand like, all right, where were they coming from, and like what are things that I missed? And there were certain things that, like, to Cheska's point, I didn't know, and it's like, oh, someone on Genius called this out, and I wouldn't have made that reference or known that because I've not seen that movie or read that book. But when I like go and look, it's like, oh yeah, that clearly is what it's pulled from, because we don't have the exact same interests as the people making this stuff, and that's the fun of it.
Yeah.
David, I have a interesting piece of Alkaline Trio lore for you. I don't know if you know this.
What is it about the shit in the box? What are we doing?
No. Matt Skiba has a tattoo that's a panther head that says "Cover Up." Has a scroll under that says "Cover Up."
Covering the Operation Ivy tattoo.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
So Matt got an Operation Ivy tattoo, and he likes Operation Ivy just fine. But I guess when he got the tattoo, the guy that gave it to him was like this shithead that was like saying all this like horrible like racist shit. And it was just an awful experience getting the tattoo. So every time he would look at it, he'd get bummed out. Oh my
God.
And so he got a cover up that just says "Cover Up."
I can't believe I've never heard this. That's fucking insane.
Amazing. Pretty great story.
Have you heard Adam has said this a few times on our podcast about when Link 80 and Alkaline Trio in the same month were releasing was it The Struggle Continues, and what was the Alkaline Trio
Maybe
album?
I'll Catch Fire.
Yes, I remember hearing about this.
How Alkaline Trio wanted to call it Hella, and
no, we wanted to call our album Hella, and they wanted to call their album Shitty. and
Mike
Park lost his mind.
Yeah, and he said no.
Honestly, I think
love it.
I think that was one of the good times. Mike was like, "Yeah, guys, I think not."
I don't know. I think that's where the timeline diverged, and that's why we're in all this trouble now. I think if we'd called ours hella and they'd call theirs shitty, everything would be fine right now.
Matt Skiba could have been really into boats instead of fire. It could have been a whole different universe.
Amazing.
So
I also,
Greg,
David, I also I used to have Matt Skiba's email password.
Oh,
I used to look at his email.
What was it? A motorcycle go vroom? Was that the?
No, it was. I think it was Crotch Trot 69 or something.
Yeah, that seems about right to me.
I will say this about In Defense of Ska. Sometimes the research process is very fun. Like when we have a non-ska guest come on, and I'll just go on and be like, okay, John Darnielle ska or Mountain Goat ska, and they just go through any like possible thing that's related to ska comes up, and you're like, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. Or like some interviewer, some interviewer was like trying to make jokes about ska when they were interviewing him in like 2012 about one of their records because there was horns, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like the word ska and like non-ska musicians don't like it, there's enough that you can go through it all and just find these weird bizarre little nuggets to have conversations about. So I would say that's one of the fun aspects of research on this particular podcast. I don't know if you have anything similar where it's like you can go, some random guest that you have and it's like, propaganda. Like this probably is more applies to Greg than like finding weird little like worlds converge and that being some of your research.
Yeah, I mean, back to what David was saying about sometimes getting some stuff wrong. I recently, as David mentioned, there's a connection here with the band Saxon, the metal band Saxon. And there's a propaganda song called Tartuffe, and the opening line is "We came here to rock." And there is a Saxon record called "We Came Here to Rock." And if you listen to the first, few bars of Tartuffe from Victory Lap, and then you listen to the song "We Came Here to Rock" by Tartuffe, there are very similar. There are very similar parts of those songs. And so I was like, this is obviously an homage to Saxon. And Chris from Propaganda listened to our Tartuffe episode and was like, what are you talking about, man? There is no truth to any of this. And he did an entire podcast on his Patreon where he rebutted what we got incorrect.
Holy shit, I love it.
Which was honestly one of the biggest thrills of my entire life, to have Chris directly responding to something that we had made with great humor and grace, and just going above and beyond to just be like, yeah, no, this is all a coincidence. But the research process for me really centers on what both David and Cheska said about the local. Propaganda being notably from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, a city that I had never visited when I started the podcast. And immediately I started getting emails and messages from people in Winnipeg saying, are you going to talk about this? Are you going to talk about that? And it was all local Winnipeg centric stuff. So I latched onto that really quickly. And as soon as I possibly could, I started having as many Canadian guests on the podcast as I possibly could. And I got as many Winnipeg people on as possible to tell stories about, seeing Propaganda in the 90s in Winnipeg. And it really elevated the quality of the show and the guests to have tons of on-the-ground local experiences that I had never yet experienced. And I made friends with these people. And then when I went to Winnipeg in October 2021 for 3 Propaganda shows, I had friends there who were picking me up at the airport and driving me around town and showing me all the spots that are listed in Propaganda songs, like River Heights or, the murals on West Broadway, or the spot that is on the back of the CD cover of the Manitoba legislature on Let's Talk More Rock. So I got like tours by people who I had, brought into the show, into the fold, to give me the local on the ground information. And that really made it so much more amazing for me because I got so much more of a feel for what the city was like, what the lives of people were like in the city that Propaganda is from, what that music scene was like while they were coming up. And it just really was one of the most essential aspects of the research was diving into the local as much as I possibly could. So I just wanted to reaffirm what
interesting. Yeah.
what
That's
David and Cheska
wonderful.
said about the local, because it's so important. So important.
I love that you got
I'm
to
cu-
experience that. That's such a cool way to kind of dig in a way that you definitely wouldn't have been able to, like,
Mm-hmm.
without putting that out there.
Yeah.
What's the average amount of time, Greg, that you might prepare for a specific episode?
Hundreds of hours. Sometimes
Per episode? Yeah.
sometimes the Mateka Marisakun Rasakan episode I spent 6 months preparing for. The
Holy
Oka
shit.
Everywhere episode, I read 7 books and I spent 8 or 9 months preparing that episode. So it really depends. And what I found is that we think that we like, if we choose a song that we think on the surface is going to be easy, like Leg Hold Trap, an outtake from Less Talk More Rock. Well, then we start digging into that and we find out that it was originally written by Toothpick Hercules, John K. Sampson's high school band. And then who sings for Toothpick Hercules? Conrad Sichler, who was listed on the liner notes in the Propaganda band roster and How to Clean Everything. Conrad Sichler. So what do? I go on Google, I look up Conrad Sichler, I find him, and I send him an email. And I was like, hey, will you be on the podcast? And he's like, yeah. And then before you know it, we've got a 3-hour episode about Leg Hold Trap and the entire history of Toothpick Hercules on a song that we thought was going to be easy to do. And so every single time I think a song is going to be easy, it winds up being completely not easy, but so worth it. So you really just have to go where the story takes you. Which is what I found. People are like, oh, the episodes that are so long are so hard to get through sometimes. And I'm like, listen, I just go where the story takes me. It is as long as it's going to be. And I give you everything. And you can, do a choose your own adventure, look at the timestamps in the show notes and listen to parts or all or none. And I just give what I can find for every episode in the best of my ability.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the best things about this format, though, is that you can make it. You can have a 5-minute episode, or you can have a 3-hour episode.
Yeah,
Right.
Like depending on what the need is.
we answer to no one.
Yeah.
Yeah. My next question, I think we'll start with Greg, just because you kind of touched on this, and I want to hear everyone else's point of view. But how has doing this podcast affected your life and the structure of your life?
Oh, sacrifices, many sacrifices. In the course of doing the show, I got divorced. I moved, and it has been a steadfast presence in my life that has gotten me through a period of what might otherwise have been an incredibly difficult and challenging time with a purpose. A hobby that is incredibly fulfilling and intrinsically motivating. And so many things have happened to me during the course of making the podcast in the last 2 years. But this podcast, I'm being incredibly serious here too. Like, this has been one of the most steadfast and important things that I feel like I've ever done. And it's the most creatively rewarding project that I've ever been a part of. And I'm 38, and I still am having just as much fun making it as when I started. And it's an obsession. So that's just how I feel about it. It's gotten me through incredibly weird times, with my humor intact, with my, my motivation intact. And it just is there for me in a way that I very much need. So that's kind of why I keep doing it. It matters that much to me. It's like very, very personal for me.
Do you, like, you're a busy guy. I know you're a teacher. Do you have to slot out time, say like from, on this day, from this time to this time is when I work on this podcast, or do you just cram it into every crevices of free time that you have?
I'm a crevice worker. My daughter will be doing math homework at the table in the kitchen here, and I'll be, editing 10 minutes of audio. And then she's like, hey, can I have a snack? And I go and make the snack. And she's like, oh, I'm going to go over here and read for a bit. And then I go back and I do 15 more minutes of editing. So I am very much a crevice worker. I do my interviews mostly over lunch breaks. So I will go from grading papers intensely to doing a 45-minute interview, immediately back to grading papers.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I literally just do it because it's just not an option for me. I have to do it.
Wow. I admire you, dude. You have a lot of drive.
Thank
How about you, Cheska?
For
how
me?
does it, and I'm curious, like not just the podcast, but the like diving deep into this topic. I feel like it makes you pay attention to the topic more, maybe in a way.
Absolutely.
Like you maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, starting this podcast has been really nice for me in like, yes, there was like 2 years there where like there weren't any shows or anything like that, but in general, in like the punk community of like people who are going to the same shows as me, it's been really great for me as a person who's really socially anxious. Like I can have a conversation, like it's fine, but if I'm like I'm someone who likes to go to shows by myself, and it's made it a lot easier to have a good time just kind of like walking into a room where everybody's there to see the same band. I know a lot of people, I run into a lot of people, I have more in-depth conversations because people like cut the small talk. People are like, I want to talk about this, or like, I've heard you talk for a long period of time, I feel more comfortable with you. And I like that it's been able to like help me cut through the bullshit and like make friends with people who I probably would have just recognized at a bunch of different shows and never talked to. So that's just like a little added bonus there. But in terms of like the subject matter and everything, it's been really satisfying because like I was one of those kids where like if I got into a band or into a hobby, like I was on the internet researching the shit out of that. Like I knew everything about Green Day that you could possibly fucking imagine a 13-year-old could fucking find. And growing up, I grew out of that. And so to kind of get back into my like childlike wonder of like, I want to know everything about this thing. It was really like creatively enriching, to be able to not only like learn about it, but also to like distill it into here's how I'm going to give this back to people in a storytelling format, which is something that I care very much about. I think it's really important to be able to convey things in like a bite-sized way that's like a little anecdote that'll stick with you. I read a lot of memoirs, and some of my favorite stories to tell are like something that I read in Phil Collins' memoir, like just random little pieces of shit like that. So I like having that, but for like this punk band that I like, rather than just like, here's this story about George Harrison. I really like to be able to kind of have that up my sleeve and feel like this is something that I can confidently say that I know a lot about. And once again, like it's made the live experience, and it's made like listening to the new albums and all of that. Like the first time I listened to Hello Exile was really special because there are a couple of throwback lyrics on there, and I was just kind of like driving home from one of their album release shows. So I had the album like a day or two early, and I'm like, all right, I'm sitting with this in New York traffic, going back to New Jersey. This is how we're gonna experience this, and it made it like a new kind of listening experience for me that made me feel like I did when I was a kid, when like I wouldn't just throw on a new album while I'm at work on Spotify and like be like, huh, yeah, no, that was pretty good. It's gotten me back into the habit of active listening and active interpretation, which I think is extremely fulfilling when it comes to music. And I don't know, something that I'm trying to apply just into my general life that I kind of forced myself into by doing a short little podcast there.
Yeah. Before David, before you answer yours, Cheska, you made me think of something. You made me think about how like the era we're in is like interesting because on one hand, some people feel like, because there's so much music and they maybe get their music from Spotify playlists, that their musical experience is very, very broad, but not deep at all.
Yes.
Whereas the other thing that the internet or our current age offers you is you can be very selective and you can go incredibly deep in a way you couldn't have before.
Right.
So it's like two like completely different experiences that we could choose in a way, in given all of the everything we have access to now.
Yeah, that's right. And I really enjoy that. And I like being able to talk to people who don't really listen to music that way, who still like, you know, will get a kick out of it, you know, we'll kind of be like, hey, that's a cool little thing. So like, even if they don't carry that into the way that they listen to music, that's cool. You know, it's still something that we were able to share and something that they'll probably think about when they're listening to that song. I don't know. I think it's lovely.
Yeah. So David, as a former, or no, I'm sorry, as a fellow journalist, I imagine I imagine you have you have had a list of to do stuff, writing, and then the podcast is kind of gets absorbed into that list.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I think it's like, work a normal day job, freelance, right? Do all that, do the podcast, and then Points had like two different ones kind of concurrent. So like, yeah, I mean, for me, I'm definitely someone who is just likes to have structure. So it's like for, as you were, it was kind of like, all right, let's get it on the docket and we'll do it. This day, this time, this is our day. We're gonna knock it out, and just like that rhythm, I think helps me mentally because I'm like, all right, that's what I'm doing. That's the thing. And I think like that's always been something that, I'm much more about just, the process, and in terms of like that kind of like research element that like Greg was talking about or Jessica was talking about, it's just like, it's kind of always going. Like I'm just kind of a huge nerd for this stuff. And I have been since I was a kid. That like the old story of like, I would get, the album and look who was in the thanks list and then find all those bands and do all that. And like, I'm still doing that. I think the music world is so, it is broad, but you can then go really deep, depending on what catches you. And I think that's the fun of it. And I think like, my hope with, doing As You Were was to like, yeah, to connect to that community, kind of like Cheska was talking about, but also like, I think it just strengthened, the friendship we had to like just do something weekly. Like we're talking to each other weekly. We had, we both had like pretty big bad health scares, and like we're in the hospital and had to go through all this stuff while doing the podcast. And like I think it just became this weird like shared thing where it's like, oh, like cosmically, like we started this thing, and then like 18 months later we'd both like, be laid up in the hospital for a while. Not the exact same time, but like it just, it kind of deepened those connections, and makes you feel like you went through something with someone. And it's just nice to like talk to people about music for 30 minutes or an hour a week, like that's really like, that does my spirit good in a time when the world is not doing anything for my spirit aside from in the negative.
Yeah, I agree. And I love talking about music, and I'm like a person that is extremely broad in what I listen to, and I try to like sample everything. I try to like not tell myself that there's any kind of music I wouldn't like, and try to give everything a chance. But I definitely like ska is the area because of my history and because of the path I've taken. That's the area where I try to go as deep as possible, and really to understand the depth of these bands and the subcultures that they come from. So I kind of feel like I kind of have both of those in my world. And unless, also artists that I just happen to like, whatever genre they are, I like to go deeper. But I also like to just kind of hear things and, what is that? Is that something I might like if I listen to a few more times?
Yeah.
Even if I hear it and I don't like it at first. But yeah, no, it's been, Adam and I have known each other since high school, and we have had different periods of our time where we've done projects together. So starting this in the pandemic was very nice. To just sort of have like a close friend that we were talking to consistently and doing something with consistently. That was like, it's been like a really good experience. Like where it's like, we can just be like, oh, we got to, we're planning for an episode or just kind of like having that sort of normalcy when it's like everything else is like so shitty.
It was so
like,
weird
okay,
too,
I
because
got this guest.
everything we did in the past was like very much in the physical realm. and it was very much about like where we could be and what we could be doing and how we could freak people out. And now it's now it's like completely the inverse, where it's like I feel like we're trying to like take it down and like create like a vibe that's like way easier to digest.
Yeah, but like your show, I mean, the In Defense of Ska show, for me personally, what your show does is it gives me something that I know that I can turn on, which is going to be enjoyable, well-researched, and interesting, and also won't make me feel terrible. You know what I mean? Like I use.
You don't know about ska?
Like your show, yeah, like that show is like that show's like it's a pick me up. It's a mood booster for me, big time. It's one of those like kind of comfort things that I can go to whenever I like need something good to listen to while I'm running. But like, so it will help me when I get home to not be in like a terrible mood. You know what I mean? Like I could binge the news while I'm running, and I would come home and I would be in a way worse mood. So I know that your show is not going to do that to me. So I know that like before you're like, yeah, we would try to like, you know, like freak people out or whatever. But like that, your show now is actually
it's exactly
helps
the opposite.
Me. Yeah, it helps me.
Do you guys feel like there's any baggage that your topic, or I should say your band, I say topic because ours is a topic. Do you feel like you deal with any baggage with your band that you have to sort of navigate or?
Oh, Jesus
contend
Christ.
with?
Yeah, I do.
David, start, please.
I was going to say, David needs to
I want to hear this.
I mean, here's the thing. Obviously, I love this band. I would not be doing this if I did not. They were the first tattoo I ever got when I was like 15 years old. Like there are episodes of our podcast where Tim and I went incredibly deep about the song and like how much it was like literally what, you know, the cliche of like life-saving music when I needed it as a person. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there is so many, you know, like anything, like any institution that exists for a long stretch of time, and specifically one singular entity, a band that exists for a long stretch of time. It's hard to find bands that have been around for like 30 years where there's not some weak points. And let's be real, you know, I think the members of Alkaline Trio, in my personal experience and the experience of people I know who have had more direct interactions with them, professionally, whatever, have very nice things to say about them as people. But there are also times where I've got to be like, well, they had fucking Douglas P. from Death in June on a record, so now we got to talk about Nazism and neofolk. Or like Matt Skiba, who wrote the song Cop, posting like sort of pro-cop sentiments and then deleting them off Instagram. Or just even the fact that like a lot of this music, like, I'm sorry, like we've got to talk about like the latent misogyny hidden in a lot of this. Now, I don't think Alkaline Trio is as big of a part of that, but I think like art has meaning, art has context. Now, I'm not going to hold someone's feet to the fire for a bad lyric they wrote in 1997, you know, whatever. And I do think Skiba and Dan, to their credit, like never really wrote songs. If they were breakup songs, they were always more internalized about being a piece of shit, you know, and like nothing wrong with that. But I think we need to understand that like throughout a lot of this, you know, like huge credit to them. They put up a shirt, you know, for sale yesterday to like go to, you know, Women's Reproductive Right Organization. That's fucking awesome. Like I think, you know, they've done the Plea for Peace tours. They politically have been on the right side of things, but there are also moments where, you know, Matt has associated with dudes that like I would call straight up fucking Nazis. And that needs to be talked about. And that's a level of baggage where it doesn't change my love for the band or the music. And I don't think the people in the band harbor those beliefs. But I do think when you're dealing with something that dovetails at all with the occult, you start getting into some eugenics and you start getting into some like basically what is like Fourth Reich bullshit. And this is also coming from someone like, I love black metal, but that's a fucking minefield too. And I think you love these things, so it's worth it to go through it. but that is not like propaganda where it's like, oh, you've just had correct politics for 35 years. I don't know how you did it, but congrats. But it's a little bit of a different experience. So I sound a little hot about it, but it's just there's a lot of information. And it's like I don't ever want to cast aspersions about their beliefs, but there are times where it's like, yeah, I mean, like putting the dude from Death in June on your major label debut, not the best look. And it wasn't good then, and it's not great now. Just is what it is.
Yeah. Well,
I appreciate that you're able to, look at it in the way that you look at it, because I think so much of the time, like you said, the guy who wrote Cop, like posting these pro cop sentiments, like it's really important to kind of look at the context clues and kind of put these things together with these people, because I mean Alkaline Trio is a band that means a lot to me too, and it's been rough, we feel like sometimes we're fighting for our lives out here, and I'm not even the one with the podcast about them.
Well, it's just
I feel lucky enough that I picked a group of 4 white guys who so far have been relatively unproblematic, and so I don't feel an incredible amount of baggage. Like, the Menzingers discography holds up pretty well. There's not a lot of lyrics that I go back to and I'm like, ooh, nah.
Yeah.
Which is nice, because as a woman who in punk, I feel like I'm constantly like, one bad tweet away from being soured, and I'm really grateful for the I don't want to put, I'm sorry to all of y'all, but I'm not here to put white men on a pedestal, but
or should you?
But I'm really, I'm grateful that I haven't had to, go through a lot of things that fans of other bands have had to go through, and kind of be sitting in a position where I'm like, shit, that sucks.
Yeah. Well, and I think there was, I don't know if any of you saw this. This is going to be a diversion, but I'll make it quick. I promise. There was a piece that NPR ran about Matt Pike, the guitar player in Sleep and High on Fire. And, that dude's been kind of a conspiracy nut for a long time. And that's been in his music for a long time. But now people read it differently, where it's like, oh shit, like in the modern context, like this is like the basis for right-wing QAnon, like, anti-Semitic movements. And I think you can like art that is not reflective of your worldview, but like you have to be able to kind of square what that is. And I think with, the bands we're talking about here, I do believe that like anyone at Alkaline Trio would like punch an actual Nazi in the face if they were confronted with them. Like they've been part of Asian Man for a long time, but like,
that's right.
There is the grace I also want to extend where it's like people can make mistakes. It's what you do coming out of that that matters, and how you try to, if you just try to do the like, la la la, I don't hear you, I'm blowing past this, or if you actually try to engage with the critique and like move forward. And that's what I've tried to do at any point. But it's like similarly, like whenever it gets to like, all right, if I learned that Alkaline Trio, it's like, oh, like they're kind of assholes to deal with or work with. It's like, okay, that sucks, but whatever. But when it's stuff that I think is promoting like, or are running adjacent to something that I find to be much more hateful and destructive to literal human lives, that's where I get a little, as you can tell, riled up.
Absolutely. Rightfully fucking so.
And I think, with those guys, I think are roughly my age. Adam and I are in our mid 40s, and I think we come from a generation, the underground generation, where I think we kind of thought or taught that like things that upset the mainstream are inherently have value,
right?
And that freak out. I think there's been a lot of like reassessment of like what is upsetting people and why it's upsetting people, and to try to look a little closer, that just because normies get squirm when they hear something, that doesn't automatically make it good.
Yes.
Because things like Death in June are a good, that's like a good example. It's not something that normal people like, but it's also bad.
Yeah. I mean, like,
so I think,
to your point, like I do think Steve Albini, the musician engineer, actually has said a lot about it, because his art's always been very provocative and very shocking. And he, a few months ago had like a really good thread on Twitter where he's kind of articulating like, yeah, to your point, like for older generations, like, a lot of look at a lot of first wave punk. There's a lot of people playing with swastikas and
Yeah,
that type of stuff.
because it upset their parents. I think that was the
Right.
depth that they thought about it.
That's
but
right.
yeah,
But it's like, if you think a little deeper about your own art, it's like, do you really want to be walking around with a swastika? I mean, that's pretty.
Yeah.
Pretty gnarly.
What that's conveying is way worse than freaking out your parents.
well, and I think it's that, but then I think those things being part of like a basis for something, and that's not entirely true, because I think there's been a lot of whitewashing of early punk, which had a huge Latinx like culture and like minority culture built around it. There's a great book called White Riot about that very premise, that there were a lot more people of color and minority voices in punk at its formation. But as is my biggest frustration always, the journalists who wrote about it, who were white guys, just focused on the fucking white guys. So boom, here we are.
There
but
it is.
The point I was going to get to is like, yes, like that exists in a context, but it's like, if I'm, a 15-year-old today who's like, oh, interested in punk, and then like goes on Wikipedia or Discogs, and it's like, yeah, why are all these white guys saying the N-word? I don't think I want to listen to this. It doesn't feel very inviting, and it becomes almost the boys club mentality. And I think there is absolutely a place for shocking, uncomfortable, painful sentiments in all art, but you have to be able to explain it. And that's where that's the thing I go to with a lot of black metal stuff, which I've, written about Nazis in that scene quite publicly and had to deal with, Nazis in real life because of it. But like, okay, I don't think that like Lemmy from Motorhead was a racist. I think he was interested in World War II because he grew up in the shadow of it and was interested in it. But that's different from a black metal band. It's like, all your lyrics seem to be about World War II, and they're kind of ambiguous, and there's a lot of like talk about Final Solution, and they're just like, oh no, we're just interested in history. It's like, no, I think you're not. The line I use is, I don't think everyone who makes a movie about war is like, man, check out how fucking cool war is. But it can also be a recruitment tool for the army.
Right.
So we need to look at art from both sides of the coin. Sorry to go on a rant, but that's the baggage I
By all
carry.
means.
Yeah. I think like what's a weird thing for me with ska is that ska has a very good history for the most part. That I think that even a lot of people who are not deep into it are aware of. It's like this Jamaican music that was revived and was explicitly anti-racist and had mixed race bands and all that stuff. But I think some of the baggage that I try to deal with is that people think that it fell off the cliff at that point. And they just make so many assumptions about everything that happened after Two Tone.
Right.
Yeah.
Then it was like all those white guys in Orange County. And it's like, you have to go like, wait a minute. First off, it wasn't just a bunch of white guys in Orange County.
No.
Right.
There was a lot more happening, and there is currently a lot more happening, and it's a lot more global than you think. And there's a lot more, people from non-white communities that have really taken to this music. So you have to kind of like, that's one thing you have to deal with. Then you also have to show how even a lot of these bands that they've written off as being a bunch of white guys from Orange County has more depth to it than they think. Like even like you can say, I wasn't really real big Fish fan back in the day, but I see their value, and they weren't just singing about nothing. They were singing about being depressed and being angry, and it wasn't just silly music, even though they used a lot of humor.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is, I think painting with a broad brush for any art just doesn't lead to great analysis, and I think we could all, talk about that. Like, yeah, there's mud to be thrown in the direction of any of these things for, what the demographics of maybe these scenes are, but I don't think they're disconnected from the history. And I think those are often ways, and this is to go back to what I said very early on, but it's a way to kind of, kind of go at the audience more than the art, because it's not engaging with it from an authentic and honest place. It's engaging with it when your mind's already made up. And I don't think that's constructive.
Right.
So, Greg, how does it feel to be dealing with a band that has zero baggage?
I mean, so here's the thing. Early on, we ranked our favorite records, and we got in a lot of trouble right away by being what people saw as overly critical of the band's earliest work. And that was a very big hole to dig out of as we got going in the show, because we were talking about how to Clean Everything was both of our mutual least favorite Propaganda records. And then people were like, oh, they don't even like How to Clean Everything and Let's Talk More Rock. And I'm like, well, actually, I love them. They're my 7th and 6th favorite records of all time, respectively. And so, early on, I had to dig out of the fact that I sort of was like trying to do the host thing and going hard, like David was mentioning earlier, like something that he and Tim had done, where you kind of like rip on something in a way that upsets somebody, and then they come after you. So that was one of the things that we ran into early on. But Propagandy, once Chris and Todd realized that Keith and I were putting a lot of work into it, we got a nice sentiment and note from Chris saying, hey, I hope that when you come across something that we've done that you don't particularly enjoy or doesn't really hold up in your view in the modern era, that you'll say something. So the band themselves were very encouraging of our critiques. And, if people listen to our episodes on This Might Be Satire or Fuck Machine, songs like that, you'll hear me talk about like what I don't particularly enjoy about some of the band's music. And that's just because I think that times change, and I like the idea of being honest about how I feel about something now. It doesn't mean that the song doesn't have a long-term impact, and it doesn't mean that it didn't mean a lot to the thousands upon thousands of people who learned about something from those songs when they were first released. So that's something that I was really pleased with, is the band themselves were saying, hey, hit us on stuff if you want to, like, it's all good. And I was like, awesome. Because if you listen to Propagandy's songs and you like dive into their humor, one of the core messages that they do is that they always encourage everybody to turn the camera on themselves and look at themselves in the mirror. So the band is constantly turning the point of critique back upon themselves, which is what I think that they're encouraging everybody out there to do as well. So that's what I love so much about the band, is that they do have very progressive and very digestible politics to this day, and they've been remarkably consistent for how long they've been together. But they're always like, hey, let's analyze ourselves forever. So that's what I love about them so much.
So so it sounds like the band likes your podcast. Does Alkaline Trio like your podcast, David?
My guess is no. I don't know if any of them heard it, but my assumption would be in the negative. Even though, like,
negative.
Yes, you've heard basically the critiques I would make, some songs I don't like, but like, I fucking love the band. I gave so many like glowing, like hours and hours and hours of just like gushing about these songs and these records and some of the like constructions, and I'd like to think they would understand that as more how we feel. But again, when you have 160 some songs, like, I'm sorry, not all of them are going to be slam dunks. It's just not possible.
That is true.
But I don't think I think they're aware, but I don't think they would enjoy it.
So, do you know the band very well, or I mean, I assume you've met them, but
I've met them. I've worked for them. I wrote like press bio for some of their stuff, but before all of that, like, I wrote a big AV Club piece basically about like the feeling of falling out of love with your first favorite band. And the point I get to is that, like, that's not on them, it's on me, which I actually think would be a sentiment they would appreciate, which is like, they were growing and I was growing too, and we, the paths diverge, but I can still appreciate them for what they are and who they are and what they do, even if it's like not necessarily to my artistic or aesthetic sensibilities. But I know that was not well received within their camp. But I worked for them after the fact. I don't know. I met them. They've been very nice. And like, it's one of those things where I to that point, I don't want to have the sort of like gross parasocial relationship where I think that I am owed anything or I know them better than I do. I am definitely friends with people who are like very close with them. And I always want to be respectful of them as people, more than anything else. So yeah, I'd like to hope that like they would take it in a good spirit, but if they didn't, you know, they're entitled to that opinion. I always think like I'm able to you know, get on a microphone or type on my computer and make a critique, but that does not make me impervious from critique as well. So you know, if they did have things that they didn't like about it, you know, I would allow them to say those to me, and I would you know like to assume that ideally they wouldn't be that mad, but you know, I'm not them. I can't pretend I know.
Adam, you know the band. What have they ever said about David?
Lay it on me.
It would have been back in the year 2000. How old were you, David?
I would have been 10.
Yeah, so
But I was
like,
going to their
"He doesn't
shows at
want-"
that point in time, so they were probably like, "Who's this fucking little dork at their
Yeah.
shows?"
So have the Menzingers are aware of your podcast, Cheska?
They are aware. I got a really nice boost in my really where a lot of my listeners came from was Greg mentioned the podcast on one of actually Dan Ozzi's Rank Your Records interviews.
Oh, cool.
Where you know he was just like he'd clearly not listened to it, but he knew it was a thing. So when talking about On the Impossible Pass, he's like, "Hey, I think this is a thing." And Dan was nice enough to hyperlink to my to my podcast, so I got a lot of people who I didn't know coming from there. And at one point they've been nice enough to say like, "Hey, it's really cool that you're doing this. It means a lot. It's very flattering." But I don't know. I don't think they've listened. I know that that Scotty Bell, their tour manager, said that he listens to it while he does the dishes, which felt very Menzingers to me. But I would love to do an episode with them at some point, and I'm hoping that that's something that I can do. And Tom's been open to it, so I'm hoping that I can orchestrate something at some point. Because I feel like, as we talked about before, there's a lot of aspersions cast about what they mean in certain things, and a lot of like, this could be A, B, or C. So I'd love to just go in there with a list of questions and be like, all right, guys, we've been talking a lot of shit. Let's hammer this out. What did you actually mean? And they'll be like, you dug way too deep into this.
Yeah. It would be odd if like somebody was like, "Hey, Aaron, we wrote, we have a 50 episode podcast about you." I mean, I guess I don't know how I would feel being on the receiving end of like this level of obsession.
Yeah.
So,
and our podcast, we just passed 100 episodes.
Oh my god!
And I made some playlists about the different LPs, and our supporting cast Propagandy playlist for the podcast is like 26 hours. And our failed states playlist is like 24 hours. So we're talking about dozens and dozens of hours per album at this point. And it's getting a little crazy. But I talked about this recently where somebody was like, Greg, you have an over obsession with the band. And I thought about that a lot because I really took that to heart because I was like, is that true? And then I actually thought about how the thing that I'm over obsessed with is actually the process and the creating of it. And it's not necessarily the band. I listen to tons of bands. It's just that this is the project that I'm doing. And I just enjoy the process of it so much that it appears that as if the obsession with the particular band is unhealthy. But it's just that I found that this band has so many gateways to learning about new topics that it fulfills a really specific academic interest that I have in my own life as well.
Yeah, you have like the motherload of source content. Like,
it's insane.
You're not going to ever fucking run out of things to learn there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying too, because I like a lot of different kinds of music. Ska being one of them for sure. It definitely was the first music that I really took ownership of as a teenager, as mine. And have consistently enjoyed. But I think that it's not like that I'm more obsessed with ska than like other kinds of music. I think I have found something intriguing about the topic and intriguing about digging deeper and learning more about it and learning more about these bands and its place in culture. And then that journey becomes sort of the obsession. Not like I'm not like because I wake up and I have to put ska on and I listen to ska for 24 hours a day and I become obsessed with that.
Right.
He does that too, though.
But that also, yeah. It is just like, and I think because it's so uncharted too, that becomes an obsession too. It's like, there's all this culture, there's all these bands that have been sort of brushed over. Their stories have been like really minimized and really shorthanded. Like, oh yeah, these bands happened.
Right.
It's like, well, the bands came from all these different. There's these stories and there's this subculture, and and as we do the podcast, I mean, I wrote the book first, but when we do the podcast, it's like I feel like there's this map, and this on this map is ska, and like every episode, I feel like we color in a little bit more, and sometimes it's an extension of an area we've already talked about, like we're like coloring a little bit more on. Because like sometimes guests talk about the same thing, or they talk about this one same scene, but they fill in a little bit more here. So it's like this. The map just feels like it's kind of slowly growing a little each episode.
Man,
Well,
I have
so many.
I got a comment on that, Aaron. The way I see your podcast that you and Adam do, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, Adam. I didn't mean to.
It's okay.
The way I see your podcast, Aaron and Adam, is everything that you wish was in the book In Defense of Ska, but it couldn't fit because it would be 50 volumes. So like I see the podcast as being like everything that you wish you could put in the book, but just weren't able to, just for, because there's so much there.
Well, and
I think that's part of it. I mean, the podcast is definitely influencing the fact that I'm doing my second edition.
Oh, awesome.
Yay.
That's
Hell yeah.
That's definitely, that factors in. Like, I just like, there's so much new information. I'm just like, oh my God. That's not the only reason though, but that is definitely one big reason why that's happening. So anyways,
well,
Adam, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that so many of these artists, even like the ones that y'all cover on your podcast, it's like started in ska. Like so many people,
Right.
like, the entry point to how they get into like punk music in general was through ska. It's like the soft way in, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
I mean, depending on the band, mine wasn't the soft way in, but but yeah, for like, I mean, Dan Adriano started in slapstick.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and one can argue the slapstick family tree is such a big basis for like large level punk in Chicago in the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah.
And that's the point I wanted to make based on kind of what the conversation has moved on to, is like, I think it's important for, yes, maybe this is obsessive, like, sure, but I also think there's an importance to like, it's been largely proven that
was
like
going to be a point.
mass
That was gonna be
market culture
good.
doesn't care about our thing. I dropped off.
I will say this though, to Adam's point, we kind of make a joke about it sometimes about like, oh yeah, this guy, we're bringing up this guy's ska history, and it's funny, he used to play in some like corny ska band when he was a teenager, and then then he moved on to something that everyone knows about. But there is a little bit of a humor to that, but it's also like real history that's totally brushed over. Like, you know what I mean? All these people that got into ska first, or
Right.
ska was a big part of their young life. And, and it's like, it's treated as like either something people don't want to talk about, or people, make a joke about it.
Right.
But like, let's hear the real story. Let's hear the actual impact of it.
It's true. I mean, with the Menzingers and Bob and the Saggets, literally three out of the four members were in that band. And you hear people say it kind of offhandedly when like Catbite says they want to tour with them, which I entirely endorse. But it's interesting because like I was listening to their EP like to refresh myself before I got on with you guys today, and the last song on their first EP that was like 2004 2005 is literally Richard Corey, which came out on the Menzingers 2007 record, and I was like curious if people had been talking about this, and I started to Google around, and I'm like, usually when I'm doing my research for my episodes and stuff like that, I usually find at least one person who's talking about something. But I found myself like 15 minutes before getting on this podcast, like, wait, nobody is talking about the fact that Richard Corey is a song that was called Hometown Homegrown on the Bob and the Saget's EP from like, that sounds like it was recorded on a toaster. Like, it's like you said, kind of like a hidden little, tidbit of history that, people aren't talking about because it's the ska related part of things. Meanwhile, I can find, the address of every punk show they ever fucking played. But, the ska punk part of it kind of gets buried. And, part of it may be like, Tom May introducing songs saying like third wave ska punk with a taste of reggae. And it's like cringy and hilarious. Which the fact that he said with a taste of reggae gives me so much joy. I highly recommend there's like a 30-minute YouTube video that's their whole EP. It's so fucking funny to go through. But that intro, I literally laughed out loud. I was like, this is so fucking 2000 something. It's wonderful. It's amazing. You could tell these guys love 311. Like, what a fucking wonderful fucking treat that I was given digging into this. And, I've said it before, like being from New Jersey, everybody either has been in a ska band, has seen the same ska band 5,000 fucking times. I used to be in a band called the Verbal Equinox, and we had a trombone player. So every time we showed up, people were like, oh, here's the ska band. And I'm like, no, tragically, I am not in the ska band.
and most of those people in New Jersey were probably in Catch-22 at some point.
Oh, yeah. They're literally, Catch-22 and Streetlight Manifesto are like the Kevin Bacon of New Jersey music people, where it's like, what is your 5 degrees of separation from Streetlight Manifesto? And most of them are like, oh, the guy from Streetlight Manifesto was my piano teacher at the Rutherford Music Exchange. And like, I know like 8 people who were his music student. I don't even remember the guy's name, but shit like that. It's kind of fucking everywhere. And it's so funny what's like just kind of under the surface that we have no idea about.
All right. So David, I think it's almost time to wrap up, but did you want to say what you were going to say?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll make this quick. But the point I was going to make is like, I think so much of history has been written by people who don't care about things that didn't come from like a major label, quote unquote, culturally important pipeline. And we don't need any more fucking books or podcasts or deep analysis about fucking Bob Dylan. So we kind of have to do it ourselves.
And Elvis movies.
Yeah. And I think it's good to be obsessive because what we're doing is we're documenting culture, and that's important. And it doesn't matter if Rolling Stone or whatever the fuck doesn't care about these bands or these artists. Like, we can't take for granted that this stuff is always going to be accessible. Like, I've written about it before, but like bands that were coming of age now or like 10 years ago, so much stuff is lost through MySpace or like Facebook events being deleted.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real important to us documenting the history of these things that we know matter and we care about because they other people care about them too. So I think it goes beyond just like, oh, we're really into these bands, but it's like, no, this means something deeper. And I think it's very cool to see how many people get to do that today. I think that's really great.
Yeah,
Hear,
like
hear.
where would we be if there weren't a bunch of, scanned show flyers, I feel like shit like that is so important. And that MySpace age is kind of that blank slate where like there's a little bit of a gap there where, if you don't have it saved on a photo bucket in the back, halls of the internet, some people may never talk about it again.
Yeah, the line I use,
photo bucket. You just went there.
I did one. I'm always
or Flickr.
The
line I always use is like, don't expect major corporations to care about the history of the stuff you care about. So we got to do it ourselves.
What do you think? Actually, this will be my final question, then we'll take off. But so a lot of the really, really, really weird, obscure stuff from like the 70s, 60s, and 80s is like that became sort of like people dug this up because they were crate diggers, and then a lot of these stories got told in the 90s and 2000s and so forth because these like weird records would be found and their stories would be told. In the era of lost MySpace music, do you think it's fully lost, or do you think there's going to be like a decade or two from now somehow these things are going to be dug up and these stories are going to be told?
I hope the right people have access to certain things. I know that there's like some bands demos and some like MySpace music shit that like I have on an iPod somewhere that I can back up to my computer and probably revitalize someone's collection of a song that, you know, they haven't heard in a long time. So I really hope there's people out there who care about archiving that will dig into their nostalgia and get some shit back. But I do think that there are some songs that I've probably heard for the last time, and that's kind of sad.
Yeah, I agree, and I think part of that too is to kind of tie to the ska discussion that everyone was having is like you have to hope that these people don't feel any like secondhand embarrassment or like, well, I'm doing this type of art, I can't acknowledge I was doing that then, and then just keep it hidden. Because that's
so true.
The difference is like you could go into a record store and be like, oh shit, so and so played in this weird band in 1973 before they did the band we all know. We can't really know that if they keep it close to the chest, and that's what concerns me. Is we've allowed a selective history to get built, and I think that's a concern.
That's why I respect bands like the Menzingers and Pup, who are very quick to be like, we were a ska band. Mm-hmm. We were Topanga before we were Pup. We were Bob and the Saggets before we were the Menzingers. Like, I really respect the shit out of any band who's like, we started out as a ska band. Like, what of it? I think it's just fucking great.